All around the world, there are strange reports of man-like canine beasts. They go by many names: shapeshifters, beasts, dogmen, and Manwolf. The Beast of Bray Road is often considered the catalyst of the modern Manwolf phenomenon. Throughout the 1980s to the 1990s, the journalist Linda Godfrey wrote about the people in and around Elkhorn, Wisconsin, who reported to have seen what they described as werewolves. Bray Road was one of the infamous hotspots for these sightings.
The Beast of Bray Road is perhaps the best known incident of a dogman or werewolf-like creature being documented in the modern day. The predominant sightings that we still discuss today as a matter of cryptozoological inquiry predominantly took place during the 90s, but there are rumors that sightings may go back 100 years or more of an upright walking canine creature in this area, and strange activity in the area continues to this day. As recently as 2022, the team at Eric Mintel Investigates may have had an encounter with the Bray Road beast. It's described as many dogman-like creatures are, an upright walking canine figure with an elongated snout, bright eyes, and pointed ears. One of the earliest sightings reported to Linda Godfrey, who wrote the book, The Beast of Bray Road, concerns the creature hunched over on its hind legs, holding or perhaps feasting on a piece of roadkill with its hands or forepaws.
The Beast of Bray Road was really highlighted by the now late journalist and cryptozoology icon Linda Godfrey, who really brought the Beast of Bray Road story to the forefront in the 80s and 90s. She was a journalist who wrote in Wisconsin, and eventually she caught wind of the Beast of Elkhorn and other dogman stories, and eventually came across what is now kind of the quintessential man-wolf story, the Beast of Bray Road. In a lot of ways, the Beast of Bray Road stories kind of were the cultural genesis of the man-wolf phenomenon, because it's after all of these reports started coming to light, and you can take this as suspicious or perhaps something related to inspiration. It was after all these reports came to light from the Bray Road area that we started getting more and more reports of dogman or man-wolves across the country. There are, of course, some reports that predate it. The Beast of Elkhorn is actually one example. You have the Beast of Plum Creek, which was discussed in one of the earlier episodes of this season. And so there is some precedent, but the Beast of Bray Road story took off so thoroughly that it really just seems like it was a turning point for not just the perception of the man-wolf phenomenon, but also for the widespreadedness of it.
Beginning in 1989 and then throughout the 1990s, there was reports of a bipedal canine in the small town of Elkhorn, Wisconsin. And the only word that people had to describe it was werewolf. Some of the first sightings, by people like Doris Gibson and Lori Andreezy, they described it as a werewolf, but they specifically stated to the researcher, the investigating researcher at the time, Linda Godfrey, that they didn't believe in werewolves, but rather they believed in this kind of witchcraft element that things could be conjured up. So the concept of shape-shifting was out of the question, but the concept of conjured up entities was totally on the playing field, which I don't necessarily understand why one is possible and the other is not, but that is what they were reporting. The story of Doris Gibson was that she was a young girl at the time, and she was leaving a party, and she was on her way home, driving through Bray Road, and she felt like she ran over something. So she stopped and got out to look, and there was nothing there, and that's when she heard footsteps of something running towards her, and so she didn't get a good look at it just yet, but something was running at her, so she jumped back into her car, and she looked in the mirror and saw this creature running at her, and it was an upright canine, and it scratched actually the sides of her car, and she drove away, and this thing was able to keep up pace with her for a little bit before she ended up really speeding and getting out of there. And there were scratch marks left on her car from that incident. The story of Lori Andreezy, she was a bartender. She was on her way home. It was about 1:30 in the morning. She's going along Bray Road, And she saw this thing on the side of the road, so she kind of slowed down to get a better look. And it was, from her perspective, this thing that was kneeled down with long pointed ears that were sticking up, all covered in hair. And it had hands that were kind of up and with long claws at the end of it, and it was eating something that looked like it had been flattened, so she assumed that it was roadkill. And as she got closer to it, it didn't run away like most animals would. Instead, it turned and it looked at her. That's when it freaked her out, and she drove away, and she got a real good look at canine-like face to this thing. She was really thrown off by the man-like properties of it. And so you had Linda Godfrey, who at the time was working for a Wisconsin newspaper called The Week, which came out every Sunday. And it was a slow period in 1991, and she was introduced to story, some contacts to Lori Andreezy and Doris Gibson, as well as the local animal control, which was actually collecting reports in a file called the Werewolf File. Various reports of these upright bipedal canines all along Bray Road, it seemed. Linda Godfrey chose the name Beast of Bray Road because she didn't necessarily believe in werewolves at that time, but instead she didn't want to use the werewolf as the title. She wanted to come up with something a little more creative and chose an alliterative kind of title, The Beast of Bray Road, which I think caught wildfire. And the story itself made national headlines because, oh man, it's a werewolf in Wisconsin. And some people sent letters in asking, if they could go hunt this thing. Some people were just ridiculing witnesses. And in fact, the witnesses were ridiculed so much so that it actually deterred other witnesses from coming forward. And that comes from Linda herself, who said that she was still receiving reports from the Bray Road area into the modern day.
A flurry of sightings rolled in during this time, which were documented by Linda Godfrey in a local newspaper, before finally becoming one of the best known and best loved books in the Cryptozoology library. It's also been the topic of podcasts, other books, documentaries, and pops up again and again and again in other volumes written about dogmen or werewolves.
The actual area of Bray Road is interesting because Bray Road itself is only about 3 miles long, and it's surrounded by farms on both sides and little patches of wood, and it's just flat farmland, and it doesn't seem likely for a large apex predator to be able to hide there without being seen. We're not talking about expansive forest, we're talking about the outskirts of town, specifically on a road that's sandwiched between 2 highways.
You have many different kinds of sightings in the Bray Road area, some of which point to a very physical being, some of which point to a potentially supernatural cause, and of course some of which may point to misidentification. The Small Town Monsters documentary Bray Road Beast actually documents a lot of those variants of those sightings. And Bray Road is still considered very relevant to the phenomenon to this day. You have recent photographs in the past few years even from Bray Road, and you also have programs like Chasing Legends and again Small Town Monsters who actually went out to these areas, got stories, and even investigated for potential evidence.
But when it comes to the dogman stuff, I mean, it's like you literally have people that will fake photos, be public that they faked a photo, but that it still is taken and believed to be genuine evidence of Dogman, Bigfoot, whatever. And it makes, I don't know, it makes things difficult for the few of us that are genuine researchers, genuinely searching for the truth into these mysteries. When I first heard of the Beast of Bray Road story, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And the more I looked into it, and then when I eventually went to Bray Road for the first time, it was it kind of frustrated me because when you go out to Bray Road, it's completely rural. There's small patches of forest, but it's all farmland. There's no public land on Bray Road, so you can't really go and poke around. There's nowhere for anything to live. So whatever the Bray Road sighting was not something living there. It was obviously something passing through. Or if the story that I heard is true, it was, you know, a local that was essentially hit on the side of the road. February of 2015, we went out there for the first time to film and, you know, kind of a research trip. And we pretty much went all over Elkhorn. We went to different bars, we went to different restaurants, and we talked to the locals. And we're like, what do you think of this? And pretty much across the board it's BS. I don't believe it. Eventually, we ended up at a local bar and grill that, you know, asked the same question. You know, hey, we're from the documentary crew. You know, is it cool we come in and kind of film? And, you know, we're doing some stuff on the Bray Road Beast. And there was an older couple sitting at the bar. And the gentleman kind of spoke up and was like, you know, I know some things about that. And I'm like, you know, would you mind if we interviewed you? And he's like, no, I wouldn't mind at all. So, you know, everyone came in and we set up our cameras. And, you know, I was like, you know, what do you think about it? And he's like, I don't think it's real. But he's like, I think I know where the story started. The story that this guy told me is, he's like, there was a gentleman that was essentially the town drunk. And he always wore this big fur coat. And one night he was out stumbling around Bray Road for whatever reason. And he was either struck by a car or was just seen on the side of the road. And I was like, that's awesome. I'm like, I've never come across the story up to then. I've never heard anybody else talk about it after. So this was literally just like a once in a lifetime like interview that we just happened to come across this guy and he knew this story. There's stories of Dogman that are all around southern and southeastern Wisconsin. So like this isn't just Bray Road. So after I kind of moved away from the Bray Road stuff, I kind of started looking into Dogman as a whole in Wisconsin. There's some interesting stuff there. I mean, I'm not saying that I believe that these things are real, but I do believe that there's a lot of factors that I think are playing into people seeing these things. Obviously, mass hysteria, it's a common thing now. You're going to see something that you don't understand, and your brain's just going to create, you know, an image for you. I mean, our brains produce DMT naturally, so, and that stuff's going to kick in when you get afraid, and you're going to hallucinate something.
You may argue that the Beast of Bray Road is one of the most important cases in the study of dogman or werewolf activity, because it creates a profile for us that we still reference to this day. We still look at the Beast of Bray Road and say, this is one of the aspects of those sightings that for us typifies dogman encounters. And research into dogmen in other areas such as Texas, the land between the lakes, Ohio, continually syncs up with this profile that the Beast of Bray Road seems to present us with.
Linda Godfrey is actually a big part of the inspiration for this series. For starters, she coined the term Manwolf, although she figured that Dogman would be better and that gained more popularity. And the actual name, the Manwolf Files, comes from a very interesting story that Linda has told many times, a file labeled werewolf with documents about these reports. So the Manwolf Files comes from that. The Beast of Bray Road is tied pretty inseparably from the rest of the Manwolf phenomenon. The experiences of Linda Godfrey, as well as the eyewitnesses who she spoke to, are maybe one of the most timeless things in cryptozoology, and to have gotten the chance to speak with her was really miraculous. Bray Road, I think, is always going to be remembered as the case that propelled man-wolves into the spotlight, and if there is anything mysterious, genuinely mysterious, behind the man-wolf phenomenon, whether it's physical, whether it's supernatural, whether it's psychological, I think that we do have the Bray Road phenomenon to thank for the uncovering of whatever the answer to all of this mystery really is.
It really began with breaking that story. You know, I really was not, I was interested in, I mean, I had read my dad's old 1960s magazines that carried Ivan Sanderson's Bigfoot stories back in the day, and early work on the Yetis and things like that, but I would never have considered it. I just liked the subject, you know, thought it was interesting, and had looked into other aspects of the paranormal at that time, but I had never thought anything could happen like people in my hometown saying they were seeing werewolves. That just struck me as such a really unexpected and unlikely thing to happen, that I had people in my little hometown of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, more than one person and a wide variety of people were saying they had seen what looked to them. They didn't know if it was a werewolf, but it looked like what you would consider a werewolf to look like, you know, on its hind legs, looking at people directly in the eye, except it had the head and ears of a wolf, and muzzle and fangs and claws and all those things that people don't have. I remember laughing about it, thinking it must be a joke, and then as I talked to these people, my mind sort of changed a little bit, because they seemed serious, they seemed afraid, they didn't seem like they were hoaxing. They, in fact, most of them had called the animal control officer, that was how I found them, to report. And, you know, if you're trying to pull something like a public hoax, you don't call the authorities and leave them with all your information. You know, so and they were happy to talk to me too, and I still didn't really foresee the story as going anywhere other than local. I just really thought at the time that if there was some sort of a dangerous predator out there, and this road comes right into town at one point. It leads from a distant point out in the country into town. And I thought if there were dangerous predators there, that people really should know for their own safety. You know, keep the dogs and cats and kitties locked up, and be, you know, at least keep an eye out for it. And if it was something else, if it turned out to be folklore or some explainable phenomenon we hadn't really figured out yet, that would be cool too, you know, whatever it was. I didn't have any sort of agenda. I just thought it should be investigated and people should know about it. It was 10 years before I left that newspaper, after the time that I broke it, a couple of years before I wrote the first book. So, you know, you're talking about 11, 12 years where I was just going along doing other things. I was teaching art in public schools. I was working the whole time for the newspaper freelance after I stopped. I started as a salaried reporter, and then later changed to freelance. So I was doing all these other things, and the thing that happened was, not only did people continue coming to me from radio and TV shows, especially every Halloween, because very few people were talking about anything that looked like a werewolf, even though I don't believe that they are werewolves. I didn't think it then, and I don't believe that now. But the media kept coming, and also people kept writing me and finding me and telling me their stories. And I was holding on to all of it. I didn't really know what to do with it exactly. I would write small updates for the newspaper now and then, but that was about it. And finally I decided that I really needed to put it into a book so that people would have something to look at and reference and go back to it. And even the first book, The Beast of Bray Road, came out in 2003. Actually my second book, but the first on all of these werewolf-like things. And I thought that people would be glad to have a record of everything that happened. You know, I did as much research as I could, found out local historic things, interviewed the original witnesses again in some cases, kind of lit the fuse, and an explosion of more sightings, more media interest, brought lots more to write about, which I also felt should be recorded. So, and the publisher was happy to go along with it. So that was the second book, Hunting the American Werewolf. And that book became an episode in the Monster Quest. I find the subject matter fascinating for one main reason, which is that people keep seeing it. We haven't really explained it yet. I'm not sure if we ever will explain it. Many other people have spent their entire lives and careers examining this and related sorts of things, and I don't know that there are possibilities and theories, and people will say, well, I think I can believe it's this or that. And for me, I just haven't gotten to that point where I can say, yes, plainly, all of these things are because of this one thing. It hasn't ended up that way, and people keep seeing it. The goal is, of course, to have a better understanding of what people are seeing and really, I would say probably 90% of the sightings I get don't really have supernatural aspects other than that this uncanny stare that it gives people, and the way it behaves more than anything else. So I would say that continuing to try and understand what these things are doing, what they're related to. I started in Monsters Among Us trying to compare them to, or compare sightings of them to sightings of things like not a sighting of a solar flare, but to cycles like of solar flares, lunar cycle, other phenomena that might be related, and see if, even if we can't figure out exactly what the creatures are, if there is some sort of a whole of or a wholeness of signs that go together that help us to see that it's not just one isolated thing happening in most cases. There's more than one thing. I think it's a bigger picture than, it's not one little creature that looks like a wolf on a certain road in Elkhorn. It's a worldwide phenomenon that has some relationship with each other in terms of the phenomenon, but in terms of, I think, our atmosphere and the world we live in. We are getting more scientists, more theologians, more really skilled people with a variety of backgrounds who are interested, and hopefully that will help bring it all together somehow one of these days.